Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby, and I am here with Adam Gillham, the cinematographer for HBO's I May Destroy You. And Adam, this series is it's an incredibly personal tale for Michaela Cole, who created it and stars in it. And it explores a lot of trauma and aspects of consent. Um, and I'm curious about your conversations with her, and what did she sort of say anything, if anything, to you about the look of the series and capturing the emotion of the series?
Well, I met her for the first time uh, about 4 weeks before we started shooting. I'd never worked with her before. I'd worked with Sam Miller, the co-director of the series. We'd done several projects together before, so it was my first time working with Michaela. And she was very open in our first conversation. She was very open to ideas of how it would look. She didn't have any preconceived ideas of the way she wanted it to look until we'd had our first discussions. So I provided her with stills, with all sorts of stills to begin with. And she went through those and came back to me and said which ones she felt were appropriate to the story she was going to tell. And then we shot a series of tests with her. We looked at different lighting and different lenses, in fact. The story itself had two real strands. It had the current real-time strand, and then it had the flashback sequences to the traumatic events that had preceded the story. So we wanted a slight variation in the way it looked. And she was very open in the fact that her technical knowledge was going to be guided by me, and that she was open to all kinds of offers in terms of lenses and cameras and formats. So we tested an array of lenses. We looked at some vintage lenses and we looked at different sorts of modern lenses. And then I went and showed her the results without telling her which lenses we'd used for which, and just allowed her to be fairly intuitive in her responses to them. And we went through a process like that, which was wonderful, because it started before we'd even started shooting. We had a very collaborative relationship over the way it was going to visually look. But she had, once she'd seen those tests, she was very specific over which lenses she felt and which lighting styles she liked and which ones she felt chimed with the way she wanted to tell the story.
When you sort of first read the script, for instance, did you immediately get a sense of what type of visual language you wanted for the series, or was it, did it require a lot of experimentation?
When I first read the script, it was in quite a different form to the one that we finally shot. It evolved a great deal in the weeks prior to shooting. The script I first read had a lot of animation in it. It had all sorts of elements in it that were ultimately discarded and replaced. And it was a work in progress, the script, all the way through. I think Michaela was constantly refining it and reshaping it. So likewise, the look of the piece had to change and keep re-evolving. So I didn't have a clear idea when I first read it of how I wanted it to be. Sam brought me the script, Sam Miller, and he said, look, there's this, he described it as a sort of punky drama. It's very funny, it's very strange, and you want to do it with me. And it started as a very small project. It was just a BBC drama, as I understood then. So the budget was small, and it was clearly a very personal script. But then it got when HBO came in and collaborated on the project, it grew in scale, but it always retained that very small, intimate sense that it had when we first started on it. So visually, I always wanted it to be very simple and very direct. And probably the most important visual thing was that we should never lose sight of the comedy in the piece. And Michaela was always adamant that however we shot it, and whatever our lens choices, and whatever our shot choices, it should always be funny, and we should never lose sight of that. So that was extremely important to her.
I think one of the things that stands out to me when I watched it in terms of how it's shot is so many of the scenes are sort of drenched in this purple and blue lighting, and the lighting really stands out. Where did that choice come from?
Well, again, that originated from the tests we shot early on. I worked with a gaffer called James Bridger who came to me and said, look, we can use a lot of these strips that we can build into the sets, and we can create different colors from them. So we brought them all into the test room, and at that point it wasn't clear what color Michaela's hair was going to be as it went through the story. We looked at green and pink and all different shades of vivid colors, and so we tried lots of different colors to see how they worked with her and how they worked with her hair and her costume. And so through that process of testing, we came up with the colors that ultimately you see in the finished series. We always wanted to hang on to a very colorful choice because it was set in Hackney, which is a very vibrant, colorful part of London, and we never wanted it to feel drab or restrained. A lot of the other work that I do is quite very low key. So for me, it was a big departure to go towards this very colorful color scheme that we used.
Yeah. There's also there's the use of a lot of close-ups, like particularly it really stands out in that first episode, the scene at the club, as she starts getting more inebriated and it edits between sort of past and present. And I'm wondering, how do you approach that when there has to be the use of all of these extreme close-ups?
Well, it's funny you should mention that. Other people have said that as well, and directors I've subsequently worked with have said there are a lot of extreme close-ups. I don't really remember that being a conscious choice to shoot that way. We were very loose in the way we approached it. We did a lot of preparatory work, and Sam and I discussed very much how we'd shoot it, and Michaela was part of those conversations. But then on the day that we shot it, we deliberately kept to a very loose shooting style. In fact, what we would do is we would cover it in a relatively conventional way, and then at the end, Sam would bring Michaela and myself aside and say, is there one shot that we're missing here in this scene that could unlock something else in a scene? And very often that was the close-up. So very often that would become the shot that we all felt most free about executing, because it was to some extent a bonus shot and it wasn't part of the initial plan. And then it was designed to be the one that would get inside the character. And that was the way we came upon those kinds of shots. It was very much the final shot that may or may not unlock something in the scene that could be very interesting.
Well, I think maybe one of the reasons why is because these scripts are so much focused on the inner life of these characters, and in terms of when we have these conversations about consent and power in sexual dynamics, which the show explores, there's a lot that's kind of left unsaid and left on their faces. Is that a challenging thing for you to tackle as the cinematographer?
I would say I don't recall that being challenging. The cast were so much of it was down to the cast and the performances, and we very quickly got into a routine where a lot of the way we worked was unspoken. So we would watch the blocking, and Michaela would work very closely with the actors on the performance for the period of rehearsal, and Sam and I would watch it, and there would be very little discussion really about how much we wanted to deny in terms of the way we shot it and how much we wanted to present very deliberately. So it was really an intuitive way of shooting that feels to me in retrospect to have been extremely simple, and there wasn't a tricky deliberation over how much we would deny and how much we would show. But it's very definitely certainly a part of Sam Miller's style is to deny and not to present things full face on. And I think Michaela felt that was a a good approach to it as well. So to deny was definitely a part of our plan.
Yeah. And episode 6 of the series takes this detour, which is, I think the entire thing is a flashback into their school days. And was there anything different for you about that episode in terms of making that look and feel different and delineating it from the rest of the series?
Yes, we definitely felt that we wanted to place the episodes in a certain chronology. So that was one which had taken place 10 years earlier, and essentially dealt with a period of Arabella's life as a schoolgirl. But again, we wanted to avoid things that we had done before in creating a period feel to it. So we didn't want it to feel too deliberate in that placement in time. We shot it broadly in the same way. We shot it on the same lenses. We wanted to feel that it was consistent with the rest of it, but we did definitely brought in, I think we graded it slightly differently, and we were aware that we wanted a shift in it, but we never wanted that shift to feel self-conscious or too conspicuous. I think the shift was probably more pronounced in the episodes where there are flashbacks within the episode. So later, when it flashes back to her childhood in the episode where her father comes to dinner with her, and we have flashbacks, that flashback to Arabella aged 4 or 5, they were dealt with because they had to contrast with the present. We dealt with those much more specifically, and we shot those with a different set of lenses, with an old set of lenses, and we were very conscious that we wanted those to contrast with the rest of the piece. But the actual episodes that dealt in their entirety with a previous time period, we didn't want them to feel particularly of a period. So we treated them very similarly to the rest of the entirety.
Yeah, there's also very very cool moments that are just these subtle shifts in an episode where they usually depict like Arabella becoming, like, going into her mind a little bit, and it brings the audience in. Like, there's a really great moment in the Halloween episode where she's doing a live feed on Instagram, and all of a sudden she's almost like gliding towards the camera down the street. Where does the like inspiration for that moment come from, and how to build that?
Well, that came from ideas that sort of popped into Michaela's and Sam's and my minds quite randomly. I remember Sam saying, Michaela's mentioned it should feel like she's on fire some of that time. And Sam very much wanted her gliding. So we pieced together, we went down to Carnaby Street in the West End, which is usually very busy. And we just built something that she could roll on. And then we lit it with this lighting effect that effectively was as though she was surrounded by flames. And these ideas came, Michaela's mind works in a very loose and whimsical way. So they would come just on a message. Often on the day of shooting, we would get a message that perhaps it would be interesting to try this. And it was, I think the lovely thing about it was we always felt we could experiment, and that there was very little in the way of restraint. So we could risk making mistakes, and we could risk failure, and unfortunately in most of these cases, because of the commitment with which she and Sam brought to the way we approached them, that commitment carried these through. I think they could easily have been a failure in other ways, but because of the strength of the performance and the script, they all married together to form these extraordinary images.
Yeah. Is there a shot that you are most proud of in the experimentation of, oh wow, I can't believe that turned out as great as it did?
Yeah, I think I'm most proud probably of actually I'm most proud of some of the work that we did in Ostia in Italy, because the experimentation there was to capture some of the scenes in a very narrow time span, where again, a lot of it was specifically written to take place just before the sun came up on the beach, and obviously I was concerned about the amount of the short window that would give us to shoot in, and I didn't want to shoot it once the sun was up and then try and grade it back, because I felt I'd never capture that atmosphere on the beach. So we rehearsed that a few times in the darkness, and then we were able to shoot in a 20-minute window those scenes on the beach. But it was a testimony to the way the crew was able to work very fast, and to the confidence that Sam had in us to execute those scenes as quickly as that. And that felt to me very experimental, because I'm unused to shooting that fast and really to taking that risk, because had we not captured it, we were trying to persuade the production to let us go back a second night or a third night, but obviously that was impractical. So we had to just accept what we got. And those sequences on the beach, in many ways, are the scenes that I'm most proud of.
Well, before we finish up, I did want to ask, what has it been like for you just seeing the reception of this? Really, both audiences and critics have fallen in love with it and devoured the series. What has been your experience since its release?
Yes, they have. They've loved it. It's had an extraordinary reception. I had an email yesterday from some friends of mine in Spain, saying they watched it and fallen in love with it, and obviously where you are, it's had a wonderful reception. I think for me, it's very exciting, because I think there's a lot of conventional television around, and so to have these voices getting this much attention, and these personal voices is very exciting, and people who are prepared to take such risks visually is very heartening. You know, you've got wonderful filmmakers on your side of the Atlantic, like David Lynch, who get incredible receptions, but you know, these people are working right on the edge of things, and Michaela's working on the edge of things, and I think so to get the reception for me was very heartening, and I feel it will allow other people who have stories that are very difficult to tell. It'll give them the confidence to tell them. So it's a very heartening response.
Well, it's a fantastic job. Thank you so much for being here discussing it with me. Everyone who's out there watching, make sure you subscribe to Gold Derby and keep up to date with us throughout Emmy season. And Adam, thank you once again.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you.